Okay, welcome everybody. I've got a new video here. It's new presentation really. Who is the greatest God? And it's going to be hopefully a great little debate. I'm going to just show a bit of my viewpoints and what I've learned so far, and hopefully it's going to be a great presentation. Now, the reason I've got this video today is it's quite a concern really over in humanity these days. You see quite a lot of conflicts between religions, and this primarily really hopefully will sort of address a lot of that issues here. All right, without going further ado, let's begin. All right, so everybody, so basically I'll be covering mostly these religions, these guys, okay? Christianity, Islam, Judaism, bit of Judaism, Buddhism. So most of these three guys here, I'll be just briefly going through, about the main gods, obviously, and then, over time, and who probably is, I guess, more superior, I guess. But then what I'll be doing is I'll focus here briefly because there are not many different variations of gods and goddesses here. But I'll be kind of focusing on this guy here, Hinduism. The reason being is that if you've looked a bit on Hinduism, you'll probably see that there's a vast majority of gods. It's just a fascinating topic. In terms of comparison, it's a no-brainer that you've got to sort of include all these other variations of gods and goddesses, because we're just trying to identify who's the greatest god here, isn't it? In Hinduism, that's the beauty of it. It just gives you that extra flavor, I guess. So there's so many variations of the divine, I guess, and so therefore I've just probably got more slides to it, but nonetheless I'll be focusing here as well, primarily in the beginning. Okay, so without further ado, let's begin this interesting, exciting topic. All right, the first slide here we've got. Yes, of course, we've got Jesus Christ, and probably the most popular, quote unquote, God, divine representation on this planet. Really, the amount of Christians there are is probably the largest in terms of the statistics wise. And then you've got other Abrahamic religions, and yeah, so then you've got then finally you've got the dharmic religions as well, Buddhism and Hinduism, primarily out of them. All right, and then you've also got little guys, Confucianism and all these little religions. I probably wouldn't include them because they're not that many in terms of the global percentage-wise. So the first slide here, you've got obviously Jesus on the cross. This is probably the most famous, representation of the divine. It's a bit of from what I see, if I didn't know much about Jesus and his life and his great sacrifice there for humanity, I would just look at this picture and just think, oh, isn't it a bit of a gore? It's, from what I understand, it looks very suffering and it's a lot of blood there. It's probably not something that I wanted to see, as a divine representation, but that's my point of view. Probably it's different with other people because it's obviously different, and I can understand that completely. But it does represent that he's in an extreme amount of pain, and his sacrifice was great for humanity, and that's the reason I guess we've got this picture on the cross here. And you always see that, so just in various movies and stuff like that, you see, if there's a demon, they bring this holy cross here, the symbol, and then fight the demon sort of thing, and but I'm just gonna compare this guy here versus this guy. From what I can see, this guy looks a lot more, pleasant from what I can see, but they should be the same representations really, but nonetheless this one's probably less famous, in terms of the viewpoint. But let's go into a bit more detail, I guess. He's a bit more this one's a bit more calm, relaxed sort of figure. And yeah, so let's look in terms of the overall thing. So the main purpose here is that Jesus has been, obviously, in the Christian theology, we've got Jesus as the Son of God, and the great sacrifice really, and this great savior of humanity. And obviously in the Christian theologies we have this quote-unquote notion here that unless you are a quote-unquote Christian, obviously you cannot attain the level of heaven, sorry. And yeah, so that's another concern, I guess, for the rest of the crowd, because there's a great amount of population that's going to be probably entering the realms of hell, quote unquote hell, or whatever it is, according to the Christian viewpoint. So, and then as long as we surrender to Jesus Christ, we'll be sort of a savior. I mean, it's not a bad representation. I'm not going to say who's better or worse at this stage. We're just going to look at this, how humanity's been influenced by, Jesus Christ, and his life is just very simple, and I mean, his teachings are very simple, but I guess in terms of the practice wise, I just couldn't just agree with this, concept, just belief, and that's it. There's nothing else to it. There's no things that we need to do. Well, we'll have to see. But our belief is great, but what about the next step, like practice and action? I mean, that's another step we need to consider. Anyway, but regardless, I mean, Jesus Christ is a great figure in humanity, and is shaped brilliantly. And obviously, I mean, in terms of the appearance wise, it's obviously a bit towards the Western sort of appearance, but nonetheless, it doesn't have to be the same type of individual, but nonetheless, it does give you an impact, and a feeling that, I need to, I can surrender at any time, and people have surrendered, so it's a great image from what I can see. It's a great representation of the divine. So let's look at another slide. This is probably going to the Judaism, Judaistic viewpoint of Mount Sinai, and the great God, really. So here, the representation of God, obviously, I mean, God, there's no actual God as such here in this representation, isn't it? You can't. It's not a physical. I mean, man sort of. That's not a way of looking at it. I mean, the way of God is not that you can see him as a human being, but as a sort of an unseen figure in the background, an almighty sort of thing. And yeah, so I mean, that's sort of the viewpoint of the Judaistic viewpoint. Sort of also, it seems to be quite powerful, and it's played a great role as well. Again, yeah, in the practice wise, the people have seemed to have similar viewpoints, I guess, but they seem to differ in a lot of areas. That's understandable. So let's look at a different another perspective. All right. Obviously, this is the Muslims. So here we've got people, the Muslim community here, quite large, doing their prayers, and obviously, I mean, the concept of God here would be also quite similar, I guess, to the Judaistic viewpoint of like an almighty figure that you can't really sort of quote unquote see. But they're obviously doing a great sort of prayer here, but I guess, I mean, it depends, I guess, I mean, how many people are praying, really, the mindsets, of the individuals. I can't really tell if they're actually praying, but hopefully they're praying, and hopefully they've gained something. And it's played an immense role here, Islam, in terms of the human, in terms of the planet, in terms of the Muslim community. It's extremely large, and it's played a great role. I guess in some areas not so good, as just as any other religion. There's ups and downs to it, but it's nonetheless played a great impact on humanity. So this is a viewpoint of a God that does, is far out, and it's an almighty figure, and you have to surrender, and whatever it says in the text has to be correct. And the problem with that is, unfortunately, is that, okay, if the text, the text might be perfectly fine, but interpretations of text differ from each and every single person, isn't it? I could interpret those same teachings in a different way, whereas you could interpret the same teachings in a different way. And same thing goes for the Holy Bible, or the Quran, whatever it is. People, I mean, I'm sure they're great texts. I've never denied those things. But the problem with those texts, again, the volumes and volumes of text, so even if it's just one text, is that, okay, there's a limitation to it, I guess, in terms of the interpretation. You know, because your limitations understanding of, say, whatever it says in the Bible might be exactly true. God, created the world in 7 days or whatever. But what is the actual meaning of that? Is it actually the time frame? Does it actually mean 1 day equals 1 day as such? Or is it a metaphorical representation behind it? And people, tend to, quote unquote, not wish to investigate these things, I guess. And they try to take it literally. And there's a lot of all these philosophical arguments, So when you go to university, you'll read all these various, high-level stuff. High-level comparative religions, etc. That's how they call it, comparative religion study, or religious study. And people tend to get their PhD, some of these guys, but, in terms of the practical experience, it just seems to be lacking to me. They tend to quote and, delve into this realm of, these texts and understanding the text, but in terms of practice, there's absolutely nothing, the practical experience except the concept of prayer as such. But to understand the text is a difficult thing, from what I understand. Because the interpretations would vary, and there would be so many interpretations, yet the book is the same. So it depends on how you interpret, and that'll depend your lifestyle. And unfortunately, this is the problem, is that people who've interpreted negatively have, become, extremists, quote unquote. And people who've, interpreted a bit not negatively, they become quite sober. But none of them really, interpreted something to, in a sense, to actually go and practice something, like, some way of practice something, except the fact of prayer, that has sort of, quote unquote, limited the mindsets of these individuals. It's a phenomenal, percentage of humanity. And I guess that's the reason we see all these little crimes, I guess, because of these quote unquote misunderstandings of text and, human ego, quote unquote. Because, many of these interpretations, over time, the problem really is the interpretations and the human ego to, to go and pursue thinking that I am better, quote unquote, is what. Okay, let's look at the God here and the God there, and God in the Abrahamic religions especially. Okay, this God, the God isn't, you can't even see the God, right? Except you can see the pillar, obviously, and the building, which is beautiful. You can't see the God there, And in the same case, in the, let's look here. Can you see the God here? I can just see a little thundering typhoon. Okay, here I can see a God, but the poor God is here. If Jesus is the God, he's just on pain and suffering. He came to sacrifice himself for the sake of humanity. He's a great sacrifice, for instance, So all these three representations of God seem to be God as a great loving figure, a loving father. And what do we see as humanity, Over time, we see the same issues, the misunderstandings, and then my God is better than yours, quote unquote, ego, I am better than you, sort of thing. And just a way of humanity to actually depict their own little ego and say I am better, and then they utilize that concept, demonic mindset they have. Each and every one of us has that, really, unfortunately. That's the animalistic instincts, sort of, that's driven over time, and using the concept of God to actually, let's go for war, go and tell them that, okay, Christians are better, Hindus are better, Jews are whatever. Let's do that. And then what happens? You got bang, that's a clash. And that's the problem. So it's a great sad truth, and it's caused this planet phenomenally. Now let's look at a different variation here. Okay, now this is the concept of the Buddhist variation. I won't say which one's better, which one's not. It's not my call, and I don't seem to care really in that aspect. And okay, in the Buddhist viewpoint, obviously the Buddhist theology saying that there's no God, quote unquote, that's the primary understanding of the people. It's not actually exactly, I guess, the teachings. If you looked at the exact quotes of the of the Buddha and the kind of text in Sanskrit, there's no call, really, quote unquote call of God. And that's understandable, but they do mention things about the Atman, which is the soul, but there's no mention really about God as such, as the Almighty. But nonetheless, these guys here, if you understand the way, most people in Buddhist communities, they do see, Lord Buddha or Buddha as the quote unquote as a god. Really, they worship him. It's the same thing. They don't, obviously, there's no quote unquote saying such that there is a god, but as soon as there's a temple there and there's people who worship Buddha or whatever every morning and pray, it becomes like a god. So he's a godly figure. It doesn't, you don't, even if it doesn't say that, it's quite commonly understood that for them Buddha is something like a god, just like so the difference here is that obviously the Buddha is depicted as a very meditative figure. The difference with the Christian viewpoint of God as that was a different viewpoint where he came as a sacrifice, and here we've got another guy who seems to be meditating, who's meditated for like say 6 years and quote unquote attained enlightenment, whatever that means really. And so he's attained that enlightenment, and he's preached all these other people about the quote unquote dharma, which is the eternal, which is the natural truths. That's what you've been told. To me, it sounds quite plausible, reasonable, this idea there. But I don't know which one's better, because he never called himself a god, so I probably would kind of discard him from that godly figure. But nonetheless, people seem to worship him really well. But what about the practice? Let's look at the practice. Quote unquote, it's kind of declining really with the Buddhist tradition as well. Like, they don't seem to follow his teachings properly, and they don't seem to be following, because like examples, monks these days, you see them eating, for instance, meat, for instance. This is completely against the principles of dharma, principles of the natural truths, that of non-violence, of peace, whatever it is. But that's been neglected by over time by traditions, and the practice is declining regardless of what the numbers are. Probably it's growing pretty high in the Western societies, but the numbers have declined over. It might have grown, but the practice is lacking. And because people these days tend to think, it's probably a better religion, because there's no need of a god, and we can't see anything, so it makes quite perfect sense that there is no god, and therefore it's okay just to believe in. And so many people have sort of converted in the Western traditions, etc. But it's something for people to think about, and it really does not. It's not here for as a comparison, but just as a viewpoint of another different variation of God, really. And the main thing with this theology, this religion theology, is about the practice, really, where the people seem to be lacking again. There's not many people who practice the meditation, whatever, the daily chores, the practice to purify the mindset, etc. And it's lacking, and it has to get there someday, but it's getting there, hopefully. Yeah. Anyway, that's another viewpoint. I think it's quite a pleasant sort of a viewpoint of the divine representation. And here the same thing, these monks are praying in the temple. Yeah. But I kind of like the idea of a god that seems to be in a meditative state. It's not sort of affected by any sort of emotions, and seems to be pleasant within himself. And yeah, so that seems to give me a bit of a positive vibe. And yeah, that's all it is. Now let's look into the Hinduistic tradition of viewpoint. Now Hinduism really, is sort of goes into great depths of the understanding of divine, really, the way it's been flourished, and the way how many gods they have there. It's an amazing way of representing gods. You've got thousands and thousands of gods and goddesses. So it's a huge it's just an unbelievable way to understand the divine. So here we got this is a picture known as the Trinity. And we've got but Trinity meaning the three main gods, really, each having a particular purpose. And that's the typical of any Hindu god, is that every god has a particular purpose. For instance, this guy is known as Brahma. He's meant to be the creator of the universe. This guy is meant to be Vishnu, and he's meant to be the maintainer and protector of the universe. This guy is meant to be Shiva, who is meant to be the end point, the destroyer of the universe. So it's a very interesting, viewpoint, and it seems to be quite colorful. Looks pretty pleasant to me. So I'm just going to go into more of the variations of the gods and goddesses, and just to understand this point as a comparison, really, and we'll see which one is better, which one's not. Okay, now this topic, people who are not familiar with Hinduism, there's this concept known as the avatar, where, quote unquote, God himself can actually descend in a form, just like Jesus Christ, in a similar idea. His name is Lord Rama, for instance, just like Buddha, whatever, is a great saint. So it's a story there, and then what happens is that there's a great, kind of a debate, between this guy whose name is Shiva, and this guy's name is Vishnu, Rama, who is actually meant to be an incarnation or avatar of incarnation of Vishnu. Right, so there's kind of a bit of a debate between these guys, known as the Vaishnavis and the Shaivas, and it's quite an ongoing thing. It's not as a major concern, but they do have a bit of a quarrel. Time to time, they not quarrel as such, disagreements. It's sort of decreased over time because the belief has decreased, but nonetheless. So what's the point here is that here you got this guy. He's meditating over the form. Really, this is it's known as Shiva Linga. It's such a great form. It's another representation of the divine, where it's not looking at a physical form of the divine as such, just like other topics, but just as the concept of the Brahmanda, just as the universe sort of thing within, inside. So it's a different way, and very simplistic way of representing the divine as well. So that's another interesting one as well. And then obviously, so here he's meditating over, he's worshipping this form of God, as known as Shiva. And obviously this is Shiva. He is appearing, being happy and blessing him, So they look to be quite pleasant to me. They not seem to be aggressive. None of these guys. Yeah. So let's look at the other guys. So what's happening is that what's people's understanding over time is that, okay, this guy is meant to be a lot more superior from the Shaivist point of view. Right? So they've got lots of text behind this saying that, okay, Shiva is meant to be the supreme god, and this guy is quote unquote a bit inferior, quote unquote. And that's the understanding, And here we've got Shiva again. Now he's meant to be, actually a god, just like Lord Buddha, really, like Buddha. He's just always in a meditative state. But again, the problem with that, and that's the problem is that not many people are actually doing what he's doing in the meditation. There's a very few practitioners who actually meditate. The rest are just seem to be here and there. Really, they're quote unquote devotees with less practice, and that's the problem with all of humanity. Really, the practice isn't there, and they just seem to be a bit in delusion. Anyway, the idea of this symbolistic viewpoint, which people don't understand, is that why is he sitting over this, this mat of the tiger? And people don't seem to understand that. What it is actually, the real reason is that this tiger is meant to be the quote unquote the mind, okay? And the way the mind works is that it's quite demonic. It's hard to control it. If you've ever tried controlling the mind, it's just like a tiger, really, and it just, anything it wants to see, it just wants to pounce on it. Just like, say you're a man and then you see some beautiful, attractive woman, your temptations go wild. It depends on how badly she's dressed or whatever it is, and then the mind is not being able to control. And if you try to meditate, you'll see how difficult it is to control the mind. It's not an easy task. So what's happening here is that it's a viewpoint showing that this guy has control over the mind. He's the lord of the mind. That's why he's Lord Shiva, sort of thing. It's a very interesting point of view. And there's every little symbolistic viewpoint has a direct relationship with nature. And this water coming out is known as the Ganges, which means the holy river, Ganga in India. It's a holy sacred river. And so water is coming out of there. So he's actually giving helping water coming out and giving life for a thing, So it's a very, very interesting, viewpoint of God, and you've got these trishals, and every little thing here has a sort of a metaphorical representation. These beads are known as the Rudraksha, which has this spiritual benefits when it's a rosary bead, so you can actually chant them, so it actually helps you. So it's a very interesting representation of the divine, really. But over time, people sort of misunderstood what he means. Yeah, nonetheless, it seems to be quite reasonable. But what he's actually meditating, but do you know who is he meditating on? Now this is the problem, is that these two guys seem to argue a lot, but nonetheless, the truth is the same. So he's actually meant to be meditating on Vishnu or Narayana, the same thing, the guy who was here before. So he's meant to be, he's an avatar, incarnation of divine, so he's actually worshipping him, whereas this Lord is actually worshipping, he's thinking about him in the beginning. So they're actually one and the same, which these people over time, quote unquote, known as devotees, that's the main problem, is that they quote unquote believe that, this guy is more superior because we believe in him, and this guy is not superior. So, and then they have even argued on things like that. That's the problem. And this is a very least concern really in Hinduism, but in other religions it's a bit more problematic, unfortunately, in terms of the numbers. And Buddhism, I guess, actually even probably less in terms of that aspect, but still, people tend to have issues. Like Buddhist monks these days, they're doing self-immolation, burning their bodies, which is not sort of something that I think it's a reasonable thing to do when you're actually meant to be practicing something else or whatever it is. Anyway, it's up to them. So this is another viewpoint really of the Shiva. It's representing his cosmic dance, So cosmic dance sort of thing, it's just going on, So it's an endless cycle of a cosmic dance represented by his dance, and he's obviously control over the illusion known as Maya, worldly illusion, of suffering, and he's sort of ahead of that, and that's another representation. It's a dance, meaning that everything, the whole cycle, the cosmos collapses and rebirth again. So that whole thing is like a cosmic dance, and he's like the lord of the cosmos. That's the idea behind it. So people don't seem to know about these things, but they have a very great metaphorical sort of relationship with the actual physical universe, And again, this is another representation here of Shiva with his female counterpart. So it's a great sort of another variation on the theme, really. There's not only a male god, but now we have a half male, half female god. How interesting is that? And it's fascinating, really, when you start to look into the variations of God and goddesses, especially if you were a real devotee, or if you really were a believer in God, you find these concepts fascinating, and that fascinates me as well. So the female version is obviously the half female, so the god is like a half male, half female. Because they're not. So think about this way: we, as a female, we seem to have. Females have actually, some qualities better than males in terms of they're more emotional, their understanding, etc. Whereas males are more hardworking. They want to get things done. So they're looking as God as both a combination, really, of the male and female aspect, and it's fantastic. Well, fantastic in a sense. It's a fascinating way of looking at it. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it seems to be quite interesting. Just as any other variations on the themes. They all seem to be interesting for me. And you've got, for instance, Shiva, the bull as a symbol here, and for the woman, that lion means she's a king. Well, she's a queen sort of thing, in power, etc. And again, as I talk about the Trimurti, which is the three, so we've got Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the maintainer, and Shiva, the destroyer, the three main gods, really, we're just looking at. So this god, we finished the Shiva concept, but now we're looking at Vishnu, who is meant to be the maintainer, quote unquote, of the universe. That's the idea, understanding. It's a mythology started from mythology anyway. So anyway, the idea here is that, okay, so he's meant to be creating, innumerable sort of universes from his own, body, etc., and coming out. And he's meant to be always in a calm. So now look at this posture. Now that's a very interesting. That guy before with Shiva, he was in a, like a typical, not a typical meditative posture, but here you're seeing he's got 4 arms, which is quite interesting. And each of them have a symbol. You can see here, this is a lotus, which is a symbol of flower, love, Shankar, and he got this weapon here, Gada, which is also, it's actually, he's harmony in both, so he's not just only love, but he's got some elements of, weapon to show that, okay, if you do something bad, you're going to get punished, sort of thing. There's always some law, sort of, in a balanced law, sort of thing. He's kind of representing that. And he's sort of a maintainer, so he's meant to be everywhere in the universe, within everybody, sort of thing. So it's all over, really. And just the way he's been dressed, obviously, is just a way of depiction of the culture. And yes, it's an interesting viewpoint, really. So it seems to be quite interesting. And obviously, the main thing with I'll just go through a bit more. The Vishnu and Krishna concept actually in the West is pretty much been influenced particularly by the Hare Krishna movement, and we'll go through that a little bit later. Yeah, so I guess Krishna here, is quote unquote meant to be one of the 9th, or whatever, the incarnations. So basically the idea is that this guy here in Hindu theology is that since he's meant to be the maintainer, he has to actually come on the planets, he has to incarnate on different planets. So he has to incarnate on Earth, for instance, and then every time, if there's a really, when the conditions are really bad, means adharma, people are becoming really bad, doing a lot of sin, a lot of violence, he comes and descends and takes a birth on the planet to sort of, it's a very interesting concept, really, as an avatar, and he sort of, quote unquote, helps humanity by various things. And one of his incarnations, and this was quoted, say, 5,000 years ago, whatever it is, the numbers, is that he's meant to be, he's one of his incarnations known as Krishna. And then obviously from there you've got now the Hare Krishna movement, which is really taken off, and one of the probably largest really Hindu influences in the West, from what I understand, over the recent times. And what we need to understand is that in Hinduism, especially the symbolistic viewpoint, is that every single god and goddesses have a particular role. And the particular role of Krishna, for instance, is that he's meant to be Gopala, Nandan, or whatever that means. What it means is that, okay, he's a protector of the cows, that's his name, Gopala, Nandan, and then he's Govinda, that's what it means. So he has a role there, he's there to protect the cows and the herd, and there's an understanding there as well. The understanding behind that is that there has to be, there's always this link with nature. See, there's always that link with nature, which is quite interesting in this concept, is that it's linked with nature. So any animal, for instance, is trying to see. It doesn't. The practice amongst the people is not obviously that great these days. But the philosophy behind it is that it's a great it's an understanding of harmony of nature and the divine sort of thing, coming into play. And obviously the other concept here is that people worship Krishna as a child, as a baby boy. And that's another interesting facet. Obviously you've also got we'll look into it a bit later. Yeah, just like here. So you've got Jesus and Mother Mary. So that's another way of the Western influence. It's been influenced a bit. So it's a very similar way of looking at it. So you've got in the West, you've got Mother Mary and Jesus. And you've got here Yashoda and Krishna. So that's another viewpoint. So the people worship little Krishna. And he's actually, obviously Jesus has been worshipped more in the form of the Christ cross, in the crucifixion form. But in terms of Krishna's in the tradition, they worship him very much as a child. So people seem to have this affection as a child for him, just as here. So it's just another very interesting way of, representing your emotions, really. So if you think of the divine as a child, even if it's any case, you'll see that, okay, he's a little cute child, so it just gives you that emotion and that feeling, I guess, that's known as the Bhakti component or the devotion component. It's a very, 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 very mature, very unique and very profound way of, experiencing the divine through the various different forms. That's what I'm trying to explain to you about the Bhakti and the Hinduistic tradition, is that there's quite a variation to the theme over time, and it's just quite fascinating to see this, especially if you are a believer in God, whatever your background is. This has nothing to do with it, but it's just a very interesting viewpoint. Another viewpoint is that, see, they've also looked at God just not as a male figure, but hold on, let's look at the female figure as well. So they've also explored that possibility, and it's saying, and so she's the mother goddess, Ma, whatever, and yeah, so she's the mother goddess, and she's a female, and she's meant to be the supreme deity, out of all these. So it's no more of the Trinity anymore. So there's no Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwara, etc. Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, but now we've got the mother goddess, Ma. And then she's meant to be quote unquote the big divine Lakshmi, etc. And then she's the supreme goddess. So there's only one goddess now, which is the mother, and she's the mother of all. So I think that's a very interesting concept, So yeah, so that's another viewpoint there. People worship, and the same viewpoint from that mother is that she's also represented in a Kali form, where her husband is actually Shiva here, but she's actually in control over him. And what's the whole idea behind this is that people, again, they don't understand. And what they've done over time this is how sad it is, that over time people are, starting to sacrifice animals because they look at the picture and think, oh, she looks like a demon, and we need to sacrifice goats for her. And this is how stupid humanity has become over time, is that because they get pictures of her, and people have made pictures of this quote unquote divine representation, and they see, okay, this man's been killed, so there's blood there, so that means that we need to sacrifice this to her to please her. That's how the people have understood, and this is the great problem of humanity, is that they don't wish to understand the metaphorical context from the stories, and they just wish to do what they think is correct. And that has led to problems. So the main, I wouldn't go much in detail, but just as a quick one, is that the reason, there's this, she's got this garland, she looks demonic, she's got all this garland, is that it's a way of representing the divine, saying that, hey, for every sinful action, there is an opposite reaction. Means that if you kill someone, if you do a lot of sin, like if you lust on everybody, if you harm women, if you do wrong things in this life, you will have to suffer sometime later, in this life or whatever, next life, you believe in that. But that's the idea, is that you will pay for your suffering. That's what it means. The whole principle behind this is this concept of karma, karmic bondage. Everyone's connected. And you do something wrong, people do wrong things, and then they don't understand the implication, but there is an implication, this connection between everything and everything in the universe. And we cannot escape that, That's ongoing until you're quote unquote free. That's the idea behind these dharmic religions, which people don't understand. And this is a pathetic, pity today, that what they do as sacrifice, they'll have to pay for that eventually. Just as you go and think that my God is supreme, okay, and then what happens is that it's just your own quote unquote ego that's representing. There's nothing else to it. And unless you actually stop and think back and reflect on your actions, as opposed to just acting on your senses, and just thinking, okay, I'm just going to act. If you don't, think backwards for a moment and just react to things just like a child, then obviously devastation is going to be a problem. And this is the problem with humanity. We need to therefore control these senses. It's very important. It's the teachings of the divine, if you didn't understand that. From all these different, the variations of theme of Jesus, whatever. No, you might think Jesus, Muhammad, quote unquote, Buddha, or whatever, all these guys, Shiva. Every people, every other, and the representations of divine is actually meant to show you a proper path of, living in harmony with nature and with humanity, with other animals, or whatever it is. So, just the last really couple of slides. Yeah, I mean this is so what it's showing is that in the Hindu Dharma, or in Sanatana Dharma, what they actually is showing you is that every single living species is actually, quote unquote, part of the divine. So what it means is that if you were this guy, and if you were to see each and every being as the same thing, as a divine, then there's no way you would harm them. In fact, you'd worship every one of them. And that's, if you did that, the world and society would be so much peaceful, wouldn't it? If everyone was the divine, how could you harm anybody, And that's the viewpoint of the Sanatana Dharma. That is the teachings of the Sanatana Dharma, which is known as the eternal natural truths. And I mean, if you wish to argue with me, I don't know. Okay, if you think one God is better than the other and you think that's the way it is, I can understand that. I'm happy for you. But from what I see, the best probably way to think about it is to see the divine in everything, And the more you see the divine in every little creation of the universe, I think that's more practical in a sense that you can worship everybody. Worship your cow, worship your dog, worship your cat. Don't think of, the more you think of the divine in that, you'll see divine in everything, even the tree. And that is just an amazing, amazing way to perceive the divine in everything there is in the creation. Everything is part of the divine. The more you see that, you will feel a difference. And that is called a profound bhakti. It's an escalation, really, of your consciousness. And you can experience that in this life. And that is known as the pure bhakti path. To see the divine, quote-unquote divine, in every single part of existence. From the smallest ant. So that's why we don't hurt the ant, for instance. That's the principle behind it. We don't cause pain and suffering. There is pain and suffering, so we help each other. If you see the divine in the animal, you try to help him. And that love sort of always flows, It's just the way it is. This is no lies to it. Your love will start to flow. The more you love this guy, your animal, your pet, that love will flow and flow and flow. It'll never stop. And that's the whole point. To grow that, as opposed to, having these, ego bondages and limitations. So therefore, probably the perfect path is to meditate the divine in any form you wish. It doesn't have to be man, female, whatever you wish, your favorite God, whatever, doesn't matter. The idea is to meditate on the divine in the heart. Meditation on Krishna, meditation Rama, whatever it is, meditation of Jesus, doesn't matter, Muhammad, etc. You meditate meditate your divine, right within the heart, as opposed to finding it outside. And that's, quote unquote, living in, quote unquote, harmony with nature and harmony with everything and one with all. That's how you become, quote unquote, that's probably the most reasonable way to look at it, and find harmony in everything, and detach from all things to make you happy. This is the only probably, I think, that's probably the best way to find ultimate satisfaction and to find your perfect God within. Right. So I think that's pretty much all there is to it. I'm just last slide here. Everything should lead to the same anyway, because we're all humans, so we should all be the same. There shouldn't be any sort of quote unquote law that says that, okay, I'm better than you, this is better than me, there's no better path as such. But yeah, to understand all these things are good, to actually take what's good from them, it's great. But try to see just one thing and think that's the entire truth is only going to limit you, creates you more bondage and creates more limitation, creates more ego, where you need to in fact surrender your ego to be free. Okay, thank you all. Excellent. Cheers. I've got a website, by the way. It's called dharmaonline.net. dharmaonline.net. You might want to visit that as well. Thank you all very much.